Start. But all I can say is I don't know what I was doing at 29, but she has amassed some amazing experience, and we really look forward to hearing what she has to say about the SHEconomy. So without further, please, let's welcome Sarah.
Good morning, America. You know, I always wanted to say that, so thank you very much. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Sarah Chen, principal at FedTech, and co-founder and managing partner of the $1 Billion Fund for Women. Now let me just say what a privilege and honor it is for me to be here today with all of you world affair leaders, game changers, and young faces, innovators of our next generation and our next decade. The year is 2019, and things seem to be looking up for women. We seem to see more women in leadership. There are more conversations on gender equality. And of course, who could miss the Me Too movement and the spotlight that it has placed on the business community? And I argue it places the bigger question as well on humanity as a whole, on how we interact with each other and how much of it we have all condoned. I argue too that it places the bigger question before us, that if we were to leave the world behind as it is today for our sons, our daughters, our grandchildren, the next phases of our generation, is this the world that we're proud of living behind? Or can we truly do better? The good news is, all across the world, women are graduating at a much higher rate than never before. In Malaysia, the Muslim majority country where I come from, that number of female university enrollment is 64%. Across the world, across the European Union, women make up about half the labor force. And yes, as we all know, in some pockets, women are certainly making political strides, with a historic high of 25 women serving the United States Senate. And you know, I'm an optimist, but if I only tell this side of the story, you know that is not the whole truth. Whilst women make up half the labor force, almost half the labor force globally, women only make up 34% of managerial positions. And in the 4 worst performing countries, as you would have guessed it, Yemen, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, and Egypt, that number is a measly 7%. Despite talk of the beauty and the power of diversity in the boardroom and the conversations that would elevate our companies, women still only hold 15% of board directorships. And more embarrassingly, while some countries have taken to gender quotas being the solution, in countries like France, Sweden, and Germany, they do boast higher numbers of representation at the board level. But this does not translate to the numbers of women senior executives, women senior CEOs. So what does this mean? This means that the faces you see on here, familiar faces to all of us, leaders at the helm of Fortune 500 companies, are very much the outlier and not the norm. And it will take more than gender quotas alone to change our organizations and where we go from here. And this too, unfortunately, is reflected in the world of startups, where Jennifer Hyman of Rent the Runway, and Emily Wise of Glossier are more than the anomaly of a unicorn. They are women-led. Which brings me to a topic that I'd like for all of us to focus on. And we don't talk about this enough. We talk about the gender wage gap, with women earning 50 cents to 80 cents a dollar, depending on her ethnicity and her background. But what about about the gender venture investing gap. Imagine my shock when I, as a bright-eyed Malaysian girl, came here to the US and found out that even in the United States, the beacon of innovation and entrepreneurship, only 2.2% of all venture capital funding goes to female founders. And if you were to include gender diverse teams, i.e. where there's at least one female founder in the mix, that number goes up to 12 cents a dollar. You heard that right. That means the majority of all venture capital funding that will spur our economy and spur innovation through our startups goes to all male teams today in 2019. And globally, this number doesn't get that much better, being 17 cents a dollar, of course, with a couple of outliers from China. But that still puts us to 12 cents to 13 cents a dollar. And that number has plateaued in the last few years, since 2012. So what? Sometimes people come to me and say, hey, why should I care? Why do you care so much about this gender discussion? It's 2019. Shouldn't the market self-correct? We're already doing things right. Now, I beg to differ. I do not for one second believe the quality and the quantity of women in leadership, of women who are so qualified to do the great work and change the face of our economy is reflected in the numbers that I just shared earlier. Someone wise once shared with me the notion that while talent is universal, opportunity certainly is not. And there's more that we need to do to change this. Now, this is why I'm obsessed, and I'll share 2 reasons why. Number 1, if you care for nothing at all, if you don't care about gender equality, which I hope you still do care, this is very much a business discussion. The MSCI has looked at track records of companies with women in leadership and found that the returns on equity for companies with women in leadership was 10% as compared to 7% for those without women in leadership. In the startup world, First Round Capital, one of the premier venture capital firms, did a 10-year project where they looked at over 300 companies in their portfolio in the last 10 years and found that by having a female founder in the mix, in the team, outperformance is 63%. Mass Challenge and BCG found that, as you see here, whilst women tend to get a lot less, about $1 million in gap when they raise capital, women deliver twice the returns with half invested. Now that sounds like a good deal to me. And of course, this is real data. I'm quoting Mass Challenge, BCG, but in my day-to-day work, I see this in my partner funds. Gobi Partners, one of the largest firms in Southeast Asia with about 1.1 billion assets under management, studied their own companies in the last 2 years recently and found that teams with female founders delivered 2.5x revenues as compared to only all-male teams. So this is very much a reality. And more excitingly, a recent study, and you can tell I'm a geek, I have all this data in my head every day. BCG has found that if we were to plug the gender entrepreneurship gap, i.e. where women and men participated at the same rate in entrepreneurship, that could increase our GDP by 3% to 6%, and that number is $5 trillion. Now that's real money to me. Reason number 2, the SHEconomy, the topic that got Bill Clifford so excited. Sarah, you have to talk about this. I love whatever you talk about with SHEconomy. I think we need to blast it out there, SHEconomy. What is the SHEconomy? SHEconomy is where we look at women as the consumers. And as a lot of the good husbands in the room would know, and as my good husband here would agree, if women aren't writing the checks, they most definitely are influencing it. Women today make up about 85% of consumer purchases and 75% of consumer spending. New cars, new homes, new tech. And in the next 5 years, from 20 trillion, the SHEconomy is going to be worth 28 trillion. That, again, is a lot of money and what will change our economy. And an important additional fact is that in the next few years, and as I'm sure a lot of you, as you're setting up your trust fund, so on and so forth, you're already seeing this. There will be the biggest transfer of wealth to women and millennials, and that number is $30 trillion by 2030. By next year, women will own 32% of global wealth. So now that's the reason for all of you to pay attention. And I'm sure you're already seeing it with the way that brands like AXA are saying they want to be the insurance for women. You're seeing the change in faces in a lot of the ads where the woman holds the new iPhone because she will be the one purchasing that. So with all this said and done, what can we do? We know there's a strong business case for it. How do we move forward then? And I have 3 suggestions for this. Number 1, question everything, cultures and stereotypes. A lot of times, senior leaders, senior corporate leaders, senior founders in their startup companies come to me and say, what can we do? You know, I understand, we must address the way we're building our companies, the way we're raising our children, but what is most important? And I think it starts with this. I don't have the time to go through the problem. Of course, it's nuanced. It's cultural, it's structural, it's institutional. And I simply don't have the time to dissect this. But I think it starts with this. I believe that we need to start re-examining the lens to which we see the world. A quote that I like is, we live by the paradigms that we know. And until we change the paradigm, nothing will truly change. How are we raising our sons and daughters? When you let your little toddler into the sandbox, are you asking your little boy to say, go out there, play, get dirty, experiment in the sandbox, and telling our little girls to be, hey, be careful, don't get your dress dirty? I come from a world, a region in Asia where the term shengni is very much alive. And some of you may know this, the term of leftover women, that if she's by the age of 28 and 29 and is unmarried, she is deemed to be leftover goods and expired. Which means, ladies and gentlemen, in 2019, we are judging our girls and our women by the rings on their finger and not their potential or their career success. And if you think that this isn't going to impact the numbers that we see today in the screens that I shared with you, think again. I've seen this with my very own eyes, with my own friends who went to Cambridge, Oxford, Stanford, and were pressured to consider marriage first, because otherwise, what will become of you? Number 2, hire and develop women. Often, as you know, I have conversations almost daily with senior leaders. They say, hey, I'm so excited with what you're doing. And we have a lot of women in our company. We love this. They are great. But when I prod a little further, I asked the senior CEO to go back to the numbers and tell me, what about the women in leadership? What about the decision makers? And they come back almost embarrassed, shoulder shrugged, saying, you're right. We have 50% of women across our company, but at the senior management level, that number is too small for us to talk about. So this means that we need to really have a concerted, intentional effort in bringing women through the pipeline, not just into our companies, but building up across the pipeline to aspire for more and to be the best that she can become through the platforms that we have built for her. And of course, as women, I know we all strive for this, and we can do better. And finally, this is a favorite of mine. Invest in women. I believe that it is time we use our power that we've earned and worked so hard for to change the paradigm by investing in women, by changing the system, by using capital that we've amassed. The people who write and influence the checks, and I know many of you here do that, have the greatest power to make that change. And how are we being intentional in making those funding decisions? Now, the venture capital funding world is certainly one that is problematic, and we've heard all about that, about how male-dominated it is and how decisions are definitely skewed. A Harvard study of over 140 venture capitalists, 40% of which are female, and 189 entrepreneurs found that whilst women were asked preventative questions, what is the risk in this? How are you going to be sure that what you're going to do is going to work? Men tend to be asked promotion questions. What is your trajectory? How big of a market share? How big can we grow? And you and I know how that funding decision goes. The bigger the trajectory, the bigger the market share, the bigger the check. So certainly, we need to be aware of our own biases. The biases that tend to favor products and people that are familiar to us because they look like us when we were younger, as a young investment banker in New York, and then looking to transition into startups, and therefore I want to support him. This pattern matching, which is very, very much a norm in the financial world, can sometimes be a mask for unconscious bias. So we must certainly be very aware of that and address that. And importantly, we must bring women into the fold in making decision-making, in making those investment decisions. Women today in the US in venture capital firms only make 11% of VCs in the mega funds, and they control only 9% of the assets under management. Now, do you think that reflected into the numbers of female founders and diverse teams that we see? I'll leave that as a question for you to ponder on. Well, finally, I'm going to end on a happy note. I am an optimist, and I am very, very hopeful that the fourth industrial revolution and the digital landscape will open opportunities for us women, on the condition that we continue to upskill ourselves within the STEM framework, on the condition that we continue to reevaluate how we're running our companies and making remote work the norm, working hard to making domestic work automated, and finally, focusing on how we can rebalance the scales with our capital. And I wanted to end as well on a personal note, that at the end of it all, this can happen if we all work hard towards it. And to the women in the room, the young girls who are listening to me, who stumbled across this recording sometime in the future and ended up listening to this point, I ask you to dream big. If you're aiming to be someone important in the company, be the CEO. My mother used to say to me, you're going to work hard anyway. You're going to spend at least 9 to 5 in the workplace if you choose to be working. Do you want to be the secretary, which is a very important role as well, but do you want to be the secretary or the CEO? I chose the latter, and I think you can too. If you're raising a fund, aim higher. Raise a bigger fund. If you're building a company, if you're running a business, build an impactful one. Build an impactful one, build a sustainable one, and build a scalable one. Women are always told that, hey, you guys only run services business, you're never gonna scale, it's so labor intensive. But let's prove them wrong. Because all dreams take hard work. There is a discipline to making dreams happen. But it starts with us dreaming big, starting small, and making sure that we keep going. Because let me assure you that the numbers that I talked about today means that the next force that will shape our global economy is you, women. And when you rise, make no mistake, whether you intended to or not, when you rise, you will stand up not just for yourself, but for all women. Thank you very much.
I'm Marty Johnson from Corpus Christi, Texas, and I don't want to take away anything from what you said. But I wanted to talk about the demographics. China is, for the population to remain stable, each woman, the average of women need to have 2.1 children. The United States has fallen behind that. We're almost there, and the only thing that's keeping us close to that is the Hispanics. And Russia has got 1.58. So we have to think about, that's the unintended consequence.
The unintended consequence of?
Well, China's having a population that in a few years is going to be, it's going to be like this, where there's not enough young people to take care of the old people. Mm-hmm. So if we don't maintain a population or a productive rate of about 2.1, then our population is going to age and we'll have a declining population.
Okay. Was that a question? Sorry.
No, it's just a statement.
It's a comment that we must be aware of our demographics.
This is and this is going to happen because women deserve to do these things, and so we will be facing these demographic problems. China's going to face them, Russian China.
Thank you for that. Not sure how to respond to that, but.
Good morning.
Anya.
I'm just going to take this off. Hi, I'm Anya. I'm a senior in high school, and you talked about how only 2.2% of venture capital funding goes to women, and I think historically it's always been a lot less about what women aren't doing and a lot more about what men aren't letting them do. And I was wondering, what advice do you have for young women, particularly young women of color, in the face of these kinds of odds?
Sure. So I like your comment there in that there is a sense of perhaps a messaging that it is about what men should let us do, and I think that that is not the case. I think that women are very capable, but I think the framing of what we need to do is I believe in inclusivity. I've been successful because I've had great mentors all through my life to this point, some of them which are men. And I think that it is important for us to definitely build an inclusive culture where it's not about one gender being better than the other. And I'm not here being a bra-burning feminist hoping to see women prevail through it all and be the better half, right? I always think that, with the numbers that we see, we need to work harder. Someone asked me yesterday, how about the $1 billion fund for men? And my response is, well, you've already received $1 billion in the last few years. I think it's time for women to have that $1 billion fund for women, which is what we've done. So I think as a young woman, look past the noise. Focus on what it is that you want to be doing and what you want to be achieving, and go forward. If you feel that there are structural barriers that are holding you back, and you'll feel this, you'll see this. When you're a woman on the rise and you feel some forces holding you back, ask for help. Look around you, what your resources are, and don't think of yourself as, I always say this, when you come into the room, I don't think of myself, I'm always the only woman in the room, the youngest and the only woman who's probably going to be talking a lot and asking a lot of questions. But I think about the value that I'm bringing to the table. And I always go into a meeting with this in my mind. When I leave this meeting, what is my legacy at that point in time that I'm going to be leaving behind? I don't care if you're a man or a woman. I want to know what is your contribution and what you're bringing to the table. And when I talk about diversity, it's so important because I see this in the boardroom, in the decision-making that I'm part of, where people of different backgrounds, so diversity doesn't only stop at gender. It cuts across gender, it cuts across background and ethnicity, because when you experience a different life, you come to the table looking at the problem differently. And by having a diverse community looking at a single problem, I do believe we will come up with the best solution. Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I want to thank you for your message. Very well done, and we fully support it. I'm Robbie Harris with the Baltimore Council. You wanted to end on a positive note, a good note. I want to give you a positive note. My day job is with Lockheed Martin Corporation, the largest defense contractor in the world, and our CEO is a woman.
Yes.
A large part of her senior leadership team is female. And the person who is the general manager of Lockheed Martin Aeronautics down in Dallas-Fort Worth is a woman. Women are doing very well in Lockheed Martin.
Fantastic. Thank you for that.
Good morning. My name is Raina. I am a student at the University of Georgia, and I'm here with the Atlanta Council. And I want to know what your opinion is on social media and the role it plays of women and their leadership in the workforce, and if it's in fact positive or if it actually ends up hurting us.
Oh, fantastic question. So social media, I think, can be a great good and equalizing factor, and one that if we don't manage it well, can of course destroy us, right? Cyberbullying, as I know, I have a young niece that is 14, 15, well, actually, she's 16 now. I lose track. They're growing up so fast. But I see how kids these days can hide behind the mask of being that digital warrior. And adults do this too, commenting on politics, talking about all the bad things, calling it out, but not coming forward with a solution. And I think that is definitely a negative thing, which can, if the young girl, or the young woman is not strong enough fundamentally at the core, it can impact her and how she sees the world. But on the flip side, because of technology, the access that we now have to all the resources, if you're a young woman and you want to learn to code, you can do that online today. You don't have to go and pay a lot of money and find a great university that's able to teach you how to code. You can learn it yourself. So I think that technology, social media, everything, the positive messaging, and importantly, the stories that we are telling our young girls about women and what they're capable of, how we're changing the landscape. And you're seeing this in companies where they're featuring top women in leadership, because I believe this: you become what you can see. Some of us are capable of seeing past that and being the first person, but it is so important for us to build the messages in everything we do, and social media is a great tool for that. So my view is that it is a very powerful tool. I love social media. Follow me on Sarah Chen Forbes. But I think that it is up to us to be confident in ourselves and to train our young girls to be aware that there are consequences with the freedom of speech, the freedom of technology, and we need to be smart about it. Thank you.
Try to be fast and furious. So I'm Marietta Velikova with Tennessee World Affairs Council. So since 2006, I've been teaching. And so I see more women enrolling in college, more women graduating, more women pursuing math and other STEM disciplines, physics, economics. And I have a very strong network of young professional women who are very successful, driven, ambitious. And as we have conversations about women and what we experience, balance between work and family, social pressures. We also all come from different countries. One thing that often is being repeated and referred to is the reason why we see the numbers that you have just showed us. So, because it's not just what, but it's why.
Yep.
Because if we don't know why, we don't know how to fix it. And what I hear often, it's actually not men, it's women who prevent women from advancing. Because often men advance because men support each other. Women do not support each other. So how can we change that?
So thank you for your question, and I want to pick on two things. You talk about work-life balance, and I appreciate it. I think it is certainly a challenge that women face, but I think we need to be changing the way we're framing this discussion. Men should have work-life balance problems too, because parenthood is a two-person job. And why is it that domestic responsibilities and the pressures of domestic work fall upon the women? It should be an equal household as much as possible. And on your thought on women not supporting women, of course it exists, and I'm not going to deny that. There is a queen bee syndrome where if I'm the only woman in the room, I don't want any other woman in the room because that is my place in the world. But I believe that there are a lot of opportunities out there and enough for all of us. And if you've read my background, I also started Lean in Malaysia, a Sheryl Sandberg notion where the concept is building communities around women. And we have 5,000 women that are supporting each other in Malaysia, and they are coming back into the workforce. We are giving them jobs because we're in the position to hire, and we're elevating them. And in China, a friend of mine leads a similar movement called Lean in China, where that's about 100,000 women across universities supporting each other. So I like for us to focus on the good things, and if you're leading those networks, you should be leading the charge in making sure that women support each other. And we can only achieve so much more and run, this is cliche, but we can run further and faster together. And I'm very proud the $1 Billion Fund for Women is supported by both men and women who believe in the cause. And I haven't spoke much about the $1 Billion Fund for Women, but we have now reached $1 billion to be deployed in women-founded companies by 2020. That's half of the numbers that you've seen there, and therefore we are making the change, and I think that we need to push forward and show that women supporting each other, men supporting women, is just good news and good for us all. Thank you. Yeah, I'll take the last question, just very quickly, last question.
Hi, my name's Hera. The three strategies you talked about empowering and uplifting women are great. However, they're very broad. I was wondering if you can go into more of the specific ways, kind of like micro-lending, microfinancing, or like international aid relief. But as like Dembi Samoyo pointed out, sometimes these things can actually damage international communities more.
Sure.
So I'm wondering if you can go into that, because we want to uplift women and people of color internationally. So
Sure,
yeah,
absolutely.
thank you.
So very quickly, I know we're out of time, and I'll speak to you further on this. And I think there are many structures that we can explore to help different communities. And internationally, of course, the needs are very different across. Where there are no financial systems, microfinancing has been a solution. But of course, there are cultural issues. I mean, some of the things that I've come into is that women in certain countries where my friends come from, Pakistan and India, they don't control their phones. So they can't even have access to digital banking. They can't make those decisions. So what then can we do? How can we be creative in the solutions of taking her for a trip when she's out doing daycare, whatever, and teaching her about how she can amass the wealth for herself? How can we pay her in cash? How can we be smart about the different structures that different communities need? So I don't have time to go much into detail with that, but I've seen a lot of creative structures that can work. But I also think that making sure we're smart about where we're putting our money, investing in startups, and startups that are started by women of color, that are started by the LGBT community. We are starting to see funds that are focused just on them to scout them out. And it's important because it's a messaging, back to social media, back to the stories that we're telling the world that, hey, there's a welcome mat open for you. We will fund you if you're qualified. Despite anything that you think is a challenge to you, We don't see that. We recognize your potential, and you will rise. Thank you.